It was a warm Sunday afternoon on a Saturday. I was about 8 years old. I'm out doing yard work with my dad. He's mowing the lawn and a catcher bag's filled. Before he crosses the street to dump it out, he turns to me and says, "Brian, don't go near that lawnmower." He looks at me and says it again to make sure it registers. "Dad, I got it." With the mower still running, as soon as he turns away to dump it out, I army crawl up to the mower because I was convinced my dad was a killjoy and didn't want me to experience something fun. I'm right up next to the lawnmower. I stick my hand under it and I could feel the cool air being circulated by the blades, and then I move my hand a little too high. That story ends with a trip to the emergency room and some stitches on my index finger. Luckily, I still have all 10 fingers. What's my point? Growing up, I had a wrong view of my dad. I thought his guidance and discipline meant that he was strict and mean. Because I had a wrong view of my dad, I didn't trust, listen, appreciate, or value him. Most of us view our parents the same way we view God. This is why our view of God is so important. It shapes how we build, treat, and value our relationship with him. And it also sets a precedent on how we view our relationships with others, our parents, our spouse, a roommate, our girlfriend or boyfriend, our peers. Today, we're gonna tackle 3 questions to answer. How do I view God? Why does my view of God matter? And third, how do I change my view of God? To help us to tackle these questions, we're gonna look at one of Jesus' parables, the parable of the Prodigal Son. First, do I see God as a resource or a relationship? In Luke 15 and verse 11, to illustrate this point further, Jesus told this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. In this story, we see how this younger son views his father. He doesn't see his father as a relationship, but as someone who should give him what he wants, money on demand. He sees his parent more as a resource than he does a relationship. Why does his son view the father that way? Well, the younger son is focused on himself and what he can get. His wants consume him, not his connections. He is entitled. By definition, entitlement means feeling that you have the right to do or have what you want without having to work for it or deserve it, just because of who you are. Man, entitlement hurts our view of God, because when we see God in the wrong way, we won't value listening to him or talking to him. We won't want to be close to him. We won't be able to appreciate all the ways that he's caring for us. Luckily, our view of God can change. This parable is a fantastic story about who God really is. God is incredibly generous, loving, and caring. Even when we misunderstand him or hurt him, his love for us remains unchanged. When we understand who God really is, we'll want to have a close relationship with him. I can relate to the younger son. When I became a Christian in college, I was really grateful that God changed my life. He freed me from sins that I was imprisoned by. He gave me a greater purpose for my life than I ever had found on my own. However, my relationship with God was still very one-sided. It was all about me. My prayers were self-centered. They were about my needs, my worries, and my wants. I was essentially using God, only seeing a need for him when I needed help with something like a big test coming up. Otherwise, I'd pretty much ignore God. Rarely ever did I consider God's feelings or wants or how he felt about the relationship. That wasn't even on my radar. The good news is this can change as we learn from the younger son, how our view of God can change. Let's pick it up in verse 14. About the time his money ran out, a greater famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so angry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.'" After trying to go at it all alone and running into trouble, the younger son comes to his senses and starts appreciating his father. His focus shifts from himself to their relationship. Similarly, my view of God began to change when I had my own come to your senses moment. One time in particular, as a young Christian, I remember spending time with a friend from high school. I caved into temptation and we got high, which was something I had stopped doing because of its destructive effect on my life and relationships. It was a terrible experience and I felt guilty the entire time. I tried to keep this experience a secret from my spiritual friends, but eventually I couldn't live with the lie anymore. When I was honest about what I had done, I realized that my sin had affected God personally. He had given me so many good things, a relationship with Him, forgiveness, purpose, and new friendship. And yet I still made a decision to be selfish and not care about Him. Although I had hidden and lied, God was incredibly forgiving and gracious. He didn't hold my sin over my head. And oddly enough, it was admitting my sins and seeing God's response to me that helped me to change my entitled view of God from a resource to a relationship. Do I see God who values my performance or my presence? One amazing thing that happens when we change our perspective from self-focus to God-focus is we begin to understand God's heart for us in a new way. God just wants us to be present in the relationship, not perfect. This is what the younger son realizes when he comes to his senses. In verse 20, so he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robes in the house, put it on him, get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found, so the party began. Man, this is my favorite part of the parable. It's moving to see the father's heart towards his younger son. I love how he notices his son while the son is still a long way off. The father's looking for his son eagerly, anticipating that one day he would return. The fact that the father runs to his son as soon as he catches a glimpse of him tells us that the most important thing to God is our presence, not our performance. God's love for us is so enormous that He's willing to forgive us for any sins we have committed towards Him. It doesn't matter how entitled, selfish, or proud we've been. He doesn't care about making a point to us as much as He values us being back in His presence. He wants our relationship and loves it when we want a relation with Him too. This reminds me of the story I shared earlier. I did something I said I'd never do again. Used drugs and got high with a friend. I was not only guilty, but also ashamed, embarrassed, and disappointed in myself. I had violated a promise that I had made to God and myself. And yet, when I prayed honestly to God about what I had done and read this very passage of the Bible, my guilt was changed to gratitude and my humiliation turned into healing. I learned that God cared more about our relationship being close than He did about making me feel guilty for my sin. Understanding this motivated me to give up this sin and other sins as well, because God's friendship became more inspiring to me than the excitement of sin. The younger son had the humility to own up to his choices and sought the help of his parent. Yet there's another brother who can also teach us a lot about how we view God. Do I see God as a relationship or a roadblock? In verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard the music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friend. Yet, when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf? His father said to him, Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day. Though at first glance, the older brother appears to be the polar opposite of his younger brother. Responsible, mature, thoughtful. He was just as entitled and had his own wrong view of God. The older brother's relationship with his father, it's about a transaction, not a connection. When you have a transactional relationship, there's an unwritten rule or unspoken agreement. As long as those rules of engagement are being respected, things are fine. Think about your relationship with maybe perhaps your local barista. You may exchange some pleasantries, but if they accidentally gave you a tall instead of a venti that you ordered, or forgot to put that extra whipped cream that you paid 70 cents for, man, it's time to put up the dukes because we about to fight. So what happens when we have a transactional relationship and your unwritten rules are broken? You get angry and your sense of fairness is violated. The transaction that the older brother believes to live by with his dad is, if I'm obedient, I should be entitled to my dad's money, property, and possessions. And just like that, the older brother, he's huffing, puffing, pouting because his rules of the relationship has been violated. How can there be celebrating for this disobedient younger brother while all these years big brother has been following the rules? When our value of relationship is transaction rather than connection, we're gonna see God as a roadblock instead of a relationship. Similar to the older son, I've had moments in my relationship with God where I thought he was a roadblock to my happiness. There's a period of years where my wife and I were struggling with infertility. And at the same time, many of our friends had started to have kids. I felt like God wasn't giving me something I really wanted while I saw others around me getting what I felt like I deserved. I not only felt jealous, but I also started to believe that God didn't care about me because he wasn't giving me what I wanted. I thought he didn't want to help me and that he only wanted to use me. As time went on though, I discovered that I couldn't be further from the truth because God blessed me beyond what I imagined during that time. I learned invaluable lessons in my relationship with him, like how to be satisfied no matter what life threw at me and how to appreciate and enjoy what I did have rather than pining away for what I didn't have. The older son in this story had a lot of good going on in his life, but he misses out on it because he only sees his father as a roadblock. When I was focused on my anger about what I didn't have, I missed out on all the incredible things that I did have. A personal relationship with God, a family that loved me, many friends who supported me, an incredible job, and a purpose that was making a difference in the lives of others. Through my journey of a relationship with God, there's been times I viewed him as simply as a resource to use at my disposal. At other times, as a roadblock, as someone who's hating on me and keep me from being happy. Yet, time has proved that I had God all wrong. He was neither a resource like an ATM or a roadblock to my happiness. Instead, like this parable, we learn that he's a loving God who values our presence over our performance.